The gavel's crack echoed through the Austin courthouse like a gunshot final and absolute. Vivian Blackwell, platinum blonde designer suit, now wrinkled from 3 days of testimony, stood trembling as the judge's voice cut through the gallery's murmurs. Vivian Blackwell, you are hereby found guilty on 3 counts of first-degree murder. The court sentences you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The woman who had once graced the covers of Texas Monthly and Forbes screamed, her carefully cultivated composure shattering like the champagne flute she'd dropped 6 months earlier. Security officers moved in, but she twisted toward the witness stand, eyes wild with fury. That nobody destroyed everything, Nate, was mine. Do you hear me? Mine. The camera lingered on a younger woman seated in the front row, auburn hair pulled back severely, waitress uniform still creased from her shift that morning. Lorelei Ashford met Vivian's gaze without flinching, her calloused hands folded in her lap, a quiet dignity radiating from her exhausted frame. The judge's voice rose above the chaos. Miss Ashford's courage saved a child's life and exposed a serial killer who preyed on the vulnerable for nearly a decade. This court commends her integrity. The screen faded to black. A man's voice emerged from the darkness, deep-weathered, carrying the weight of a Texas drawl softened by education and decades of boardroom negotiations. Nathaniel Carver's tone held neither triumph nor vindication, only the hard-earned wisdom of a man who'd nearly lost everything to his own blindness. They say you can't judge a book by its cover, but I learned you can't judge a soul by its circumstances. This is how a waitress with bleeding hands taught a billionaire about grace and exposed the devil in a designer dress. The words hung in the silence. 6 months earlier. October present day. Austin, Texas. The rain hadn't started yet, but the October air promised it soon, that peculiar heaviness that pressed against the limestone buildings downtown, turning the twilight into something thick and waiting. La Lumiere occupied the corner of 6th and Congress, its floor-to-ceiling windows glowing with the warm amber of old money and new excess. Inside, crystal chandeliers refracted light across white tablecloths, each setting precise enough to satisfy surgical standards. Lorelei Ashford moved through the dining room with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd learned to make herself invisible. 14 hours into a double shift. Her lower back throbbed where the old injury lived, a car accident 5 years ago that had taken more than just her physical well-being, but she'd learned to compartmentalize pain the way soldiers did, tucking it into a corner of her mind and moving forward anyway. The tray in her hands held 4 bowls of lobster bisque, each one priced at $48. Her right wrist ached from the weight, but she kept her movements smooth, gliding between tables of tech executives and oil money, their conversations a blur of stock options and vacation homes she'd never see. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She ignored it. Jean-Baptiste Moreau, the floor manager, watched from his station near the kitchen doors, his Napoleon complex manifesting in the way he stood on the balls of his feet, trying to add height to his 5'6" frame. He'd emigrated from Lyon 15 years ago and never let anyone forget it, wielding his French accent like a weapon against the staff he considered beneath him. The phone buzzed again. Persistent. Lore delivered the bisque to table 14, a quartet of lawyers celebrating a settlement, and retreated toward the service corridor. She pulled out her phone screen, cracked from being dropped too many times on pavement she couldn't afford to replace. Austin General Hospital. The caller ID made her stomach clench. She pressed the phone to her ear, keeping her voice low. "This is Lore." The voice on the other end belonged to Nurse Patricia Chen, third-shift supervisor, the only one at Austin General who still treated Lore like a human being instead of a reminder of medical debt. "Miss Ashford, I'm calling about your mother. Helen's scheduled for her 8th round of chemotherapy tomorrow, but the billing department flagged her account. Without payment of $4,200 by morning, we'll have to postpone treatment." The words landed like stones in still water, each ripple spreading outward until they touched everything. Lore leaned against the corridor wall, the coolness of the plaster seeping through her uniform. "Can you give me until Friday? I'm working doubles all week and—" "I tried, honey, I really did. But the new administrator, he's got rules about indigent care." Without payment or insurance approval, we have to transfer her to county hospice. County hospice. The place where people went to die slowly stretched thin across hallways that smelled of disinfectant and resignation. I understand. Thank you for calling, Patricia. Laura ended the call before the nurse could offer sympathy she couldn't use. She pulled her apron off, reached into the hidden pocket she'd sewn into the lining, and removed the small vinyl envelope where she kept her cash. Tips from the past 3 weeks carefully counted and recounted. $267.43. She closed her eyes, pressing her forehead against the cool wall. The math didn't work. It never worked. $4,200. Rent was 3 weeks overdue, another $850. The electricity company had sent a final notice. Her car needed inspection, and the check engine light had been on for 2 months. God, I can't do this anymore. The thought arrived unbidden, unwelcome. She pushed it down the way she always did, replacing despair with the mechanical movements of survival. She'd figure something out. She always did. There had to be a way. The kitchen doors swung open. Jean-Baptiste's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. Lower table 9 needs water. Now. She tucked the money away, straightened her uniform, and stepped back into the dining room. Survival meant moving forward, even when every step felt like walking through concrete. Table 9 occupied the restaurant's VIP section, a raised platform near the windows overlooking the city lights. 3 people sat beneath the low-hanging Murano glass fixture, 1 man, 1 woman, 1 child. Nathaniel Carver commanded attention without effort. 65 years old, silver beard, trimmed with military precision shoulders, still broad despite the years that had begun to curve his spine. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than Lore made in 3 months, but his feet crossed at the ankle beneath the table bore scuffed cowboy boots, the kind ranchers wore, not the ornamental kind sold in boutiques. His hands wrapped around a glass of bourbon showed calluses that spoke of a man who'd built something before he'd bought things. The woman beside him embodied a different kind of wealth, the cultivated kind where every detail screamed careful curation. Vivian Blackwell had turned 42 last spring, though her face suggested careful maintenance rather than natural preservation. Blonde hair swept into a chignon that probably required professional assistance. Emerald dress that hugged curves, sculpted by Pilates and personal training. Diamonds at her throat, wrists, fingers enough to make her dangerous to sit near in a robbery. But it was the child who stopped Lore mid-step. 5 years old, maybe 6. Dark curls that refused to be tamed falling across a face flushed red with distress. He wore a miniature suit, navy blue, with a white shirt buttoned to the collar. The kind of formal wear that made adults uncomfortable, let alone a kindergartner. His small hands clawed at the starched fabric around his neck. Fingers, desperate eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal searching for escape. Lore had seen that look before. She approached with the water pitcher, refilling glasses with the smooth, unobtrusive movements Jean-Baptiste demanded. The child Jasper, she'd hear him called later, made a sound halfway between a whimper and a growl, pushing his plate away so hard the silverware clattered. Vivian's manicured hand shot out, gripping the boy's wrist. "Stop it. We're in public." Her voice carried the particular cruelty of someone who believed discipline and dominance were synonyms. The child flinched but didn't stop moving, his whole body vibrating with an energy that had nowhere to go. Nathaniel set his bourbon down the glass, meeting the tablecloth with barely a sound. "Vivian, maybe we should..." "Should what? Leave again? He needs to learn, Nate. Your son spoiled him rotten, and now we're dealing with the consequences." The words landed with the weight of long-rehearsed arguments. Nathaniel's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, and in that silence Lore recognized something she knew too well, the exhaustion of someone who'd stopped fighting battles he couldn't win. She finished pouring water and retreated, but something made her glance back. Nathaniel was watching her, not with the predatory assessment some men employed, but with a confusion that seemed to age him further. His eyes, steel gray beneath silver brows, held a question he couldn't articulate. "You remind me of someone." The thought crossed his face so clearly she could almost hear it. Lore looked away, first moving back toward the kitchen. She had 4 tables to manage, and Jean-Baptiste's scrutiny followed her like a spotlight. The crash shattered the restaurant's careful ambiance. Laure had been carrying a tray of white truffle risotto, the signature dish, $85 per plate, 6 orders balanced with the precision of practice. Jean-Baptiste had been walking in the opposite direction, moving too fast, always too fast. His small man energy manifesting in sharp movements and sharper words. He shoved past her without warning. The tray tilted. Physics took over. 6 plates of risotto slid in slow motion, the kind of disaster that feels inevitable even as you watch it unfold. Laure twisted trying to catch them, but gravity had already won. The plates struck the marble floor in sequence 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, each impact a gunshot of breaking porcelain. The dining room fell silent. Truffle-infused rice spread across the burgundy carpet in pale rivers. Shards of bone china glittered under the chandeliers. $500 of food ruined. Jean-Baptiste's face flushed purple. "You clumsy idiot." His hand moved before Laure's brain registered the intention. The slap caught her across the left cheek, the sound of skin on skin echoing in the stunned quiet. Her head snapped sideways, auburn hair escaping its tight bun, and for one suspended moment the entire restaurant held its breath. Laure tasted copper. Her cheek burned. But she didn't raise her hand to touch it, didn't let tears form, didn't give Jean-Baptiste the satisfaction of seeing her break. Instead, she knelt slowly and began picking up the broken pieces with bare hands. A shard of porcelain sliced her palm. Blood welled, mixing with the risotto. At table 9, Nathaniel Carver half rose from his seat, every muscle tensed toward intervention. Vivian's hand clamped on his forearm nails, digging through the suit fabric. "Don't! It's not our concern." He hesitated, caught between instinct and conditioning, while Jean-Baptiste loomed over Laure's kneeling form. "You know the rules, Laure. Last chance. Table 9's main course arrives in 5 minutes. Fix their disaster, or you're done." She gathered the last pieces of china, ignoring the blood now dripping from her palm onto the carpet. When she stood, her face held no emotion, not anger, not shame, not even resignation. Just the blank professionalism of someone who'd learned that dignity meant refusing to perform your own humiliation. "Yes, sir." She walked to the kitchen, hands full of broken porcelain and ruined food, while the restaurant slowly resumed its normal rhythm. The violinist in the corner began playing again. Conversations restarted. The moment passed forgotten by everyone except the woman with blood on her hands and the man who couldn't stop watching her go. Table 9's main courses arrived 6 minutes later. Wagyu beef, seared duck, and for Jasper, a plain chicken breast cut into precise cubes. Laure delivered them with bandaged hands, moving efficiently despite the throbbing in her palm. Jasper stared at his plate, then pushed it away. His breathing had become rapid, shallow, the kind of hyperventilation that preceded a full breakdown. The starched collar of his shirt had rubbed his neck raw, leaving angry red marks that no one seemed to notice. Vivian leaned close, her voice a hiss meant to carry. "Eat. Now. Or we leave you in the car." The threat made Jasper's breathing worse. He grabbed the edge of the table, his small knuckles white. "Burning. It's burning." "Nothing is burning. You're being dramatic." But Nathaniel had finally noticed the rash creeping up his grandson's neck, the way the boy's pupils had dilated to black pools, how his gaze skittered around the room, unable to focus. "Vivian, something's wrong. He's manipulating you, like always." Jasper's control snapped. The scream that erupted from his small body carried the pitch of genuine terror, the kind of sound that made everyone in the restaurant stop mid-bite. He threw his water glass. It shattered against the wall. His hands flew to his ears, pressing hard enough to hurt, trying to block out sounds only he could hear. "Make it stop too loud, burning." He kicked the table leg. The impact sent the centerpiece, a crystal vase holding white orchids, toppling. It struck the floor and exploded into 1,000 glittering pieces. Guests at nearby tables pushed back their chairs. Someone gasped. A woman pulled her purse closer as if the child's distress might be contagious. Jean-Baptiste appeared within seconds. His face the particular shade of fury reserved for lost revenue and damaged reputation. "Mr. Carver, I apologize, but we've received complaints. Perhaps it would be best if..." "If what?" Nathaniel's voice carried steel beneath the Texas drawl. "If we remove my grandson like he's defective merchandise." "If the child could be calmed, sir, or taken outside until—" Jasper screamed again this time, throwing himself onto the floor, his small body convulsing with sobs. He clawed at his collar, trying to rip it open, fabric tearing under his desperate fingers. Vivian stood smoothing her dress with the careful movements of someone performing for an audience. "Nate, this is humiliating. Call his handler. Have them take him to the car. The nanny quit this morning. Then security. I'm not watching this circus a moment longer." Jean-Baptiste gestured to the security guard stationed near the entrance, a thick-necked man in an ill-fitting suit who approached with the enthusiasm of someone being asked to remove a wild animal. That's when Laure moved. She didn't ask permission, didn't wait for approval. She simply walked past Jean-Baptiste, past the security guard, past Vivian's scandalized expression, and knelt on the floor beside Jasper's thrashing form. The boy didn't see her at first, lost in whatever private hell his nervous system had created. Laure positioned herself at his eye level, below his line of sight rather than above it, making herself smaller, less threatening. "Jasper." Her voice cut through the chaos, not loud but clear, carrying a frequency that somehow reached him. His eyes found hers, brown, meeting gray-green, and for a second the screaming stopped. "I know it hurts. I know the light is making it worse. Can you count with me?" She held up one finger, then two, then three. Jasper's breathing hitched, his focus narrowing to her hand, her face, the calm, radiating from her like a lifeline thrown to a drowning swimmer. Laure's gaze swept the table. The LED candle in the centerpiece, designed to mimic flickering flame, pulsed at 60 hertz, the strobe effect invisible to most adults but torture for a child with sensory processing disorder. The starched collar cutting into Jasper's neck. Vivian's perfume. Chanel No. 5, heavy enough to choke on. She grabbed the water pitcher from a nearby service station, soaked a cloth napkin in ice water, and draped it across Jasper's neck without touching him first, letting the cold fabric make contact before her hands did. The effect was instantaneous. His shoulders dropped 3 inches. The screaming dissolved into ragged breathing. Laure reached for the LED candle and covered it with the heavy silver breadbasket, plunging their small circle into relative darkness. Then she met Jasper's eyes again. "Better." The word came out as a croak, his voice raw from screaming. "Better." The dining room had gone completely silent. 100 pairs of eyes watched a waitress kneel on the floor beside a billionaire's grandson performing a miracle with nothing but water and common sense. Jasper reached out with one trembling hand and grabbed Laure's fingers. His grip was desperate, a drowning child clutching driftwood. "You smell like cookies. Like my mommy." The words hit Laure like a physical blow. She'd heard them before 5 years ago in a different hospital from a different child who'd stopped breathing while holding her hand. Her daughter Briar's last coherent sentence before the machines took over. "Mommy smells like cookies." Laure's throat closed. For a moment she couldn't speak, couldn't move, could only kneel there while a 5-year-old stranger brought her daughter's ghost into a restaurant full of people who'd never understand. She forced air into her lungs. "Your mommy sounds like she was wonderful." Above them, Vivian's voice sliced through the moment like a blade. "How dare you? How dare you touch him? You've contaminated a $400 shirt and you're fired. Jean-Baptiste, call security now." Laure stood slowly, releasing Jasper's hand with a gentleness that made the separation feel like abandonment. She faced Vivian, this woman in emeralds and fury, and kept her voice level. "Ma'am, with respect, the collar was choking him. The strobe light was causing pain. He has sensory processing disorder. She needs to be fired." Vivian turned to Jean-Baptiste, who'd been standing frozen, caught between his natural servility toward wealth and his personal vendetta against Laure. "Fire her, now. I will not be lectured by the help." Jean-Baptiste found his voice. "You're done, Laure. Security will escort you out." For the first time since the crisis began, Nathaniel Carver spoke. His voice carried the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed, but also the bewilderment of a man watching his world rearranged by forces he didn't understand. "Wait, what did you say about sensory processing disorder?" Lore turned to face him. This silver-haired man whose grandson still sat on the floor clutching the wet napkin like a talisman. Your grandson has SPD, sensory processing disorder. Certain stimuli, lights, sounds, textures, smells overwhelm his nervous system. It's not behavioral. It's neurological. My daughter had it. The past tense hung in the air like smoke. Nathaniel studied her face with an intensity that made Lore want to look away. Recognition flickered in his expression, not of her specifically, but of something she represented, some ghost he couldn't name. Your daughter. She passed away 6 months ago. The security guard's hand closed on Lore's elbow. Jean-Baptiste had found his spine again, emboldened by Vivienne's fury. She's fired. Escorted out. Now. They pulled her toward the kitchen exit while Jasper began screaming again, the sound following her like an accusation. Lore didn't resist. She let them guide her through the swinging doors, past the line cooks who wouldn't meet her eyes, past the dishwasher who'd always bummed cigarettes from her, through the narrow hallway to the back alley where the dumpsters lived. Jean-Baptiste threw her apron at her chest. You were warned. Goodbye, Lore. The metal door slammed shut. The deadbolt slid home with a sound like finality. The rain had started. October in Austin meant cold fronts that blew in from nowhere, transforming the air from summer warmth to autumn chill in the span of an hour. Lore stood in the alley behind La Lumiere water, soaking through her uniform, plastering her hair to her skull. She leaned against the brick wall, the rough texture catching on her shirt, and let herself breathe. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation began to drain away, leaving exhaustion in its wake. 14 hours of standing. A slap that still burned, hands that ached from broken china, and now no job. Her phone rang. She pulled it from her pocket, the cracked screen making the caller ID hard to read. Austin General Hospital. Again. This is Lore. Patricia's voice carried an edge of panic this time. Miss Ashford, your mother, Helen coded 10 minutes ago. We got her back, but she's critical. She needs emergency surgery within 48 hours or... How much? 18,000. The cardiac surgeon won't operate without... I don't have $18,000. The words came out flat, defeated, the sound of someone who'd run out of miracles. Patricia's silence spoke volumes. When she found her voice again, it carried the weight of someone delivering a death sentence. Then we'll transfer her to county hospice tomorrow morning. I'm sorry, Lore. I tried. I know you did. Thank you. Lore ended the call and sank down the wall until she sat on the wet pavement, knees pulled to her chest. The rain fell harder, drumming on the dumpster lids, washing the day's kitchen grease into the storm drains. $18,000, rent overdue, car payment late, electric bill threatening shutoff, and now no income. The scream built in her chest like pressure in a closed vessel, rising until it erupted into the rain-soaked darkness, a sound of pure frustration and helplessness that no one would hear over the storm. God, I can't do this anymore. The admission felt like surrender. Inside La Lumiere, Nathaniel Carver sat in the back of his Cadillac Escalade, the engine idling, the privacy partition raised between him and Marcus, his driver of 30 years. Jasper slept in the car seat beside him, finally calm after Vivienne had administered something from a small amber bottle she carried in her purse, just a mild sedative the doctor prescribed. Vivienne herself had gone home in a separate car, citing a headache and Nathaniel's embarrassing display of weakness in the restaurant. She'd kissed his cheek before leaving her lips cold against his skin. Focus on the merger, darling. Once the trust transfers Jasper's inheritance to me as his legal guardian, you can finally retire. We'll send the boy to that wonderful facility in Montana. Professional care. You won't have to watch him suffer anymore. The words had sounded reasonable in the moment. They always did. But now, sitting in the darkened car, watching his grandson sleep with his small hand still clutching the damp napkin from the restaurant, Nathaniel felt something shift in his chest, a crack in the careful structure he'd built to survive grief. Jasper's neck bore red welts where the collar had rubbed the skin raw. Nathaniel reached out, gently touching the inflamed skin, and Jasper flinched in his sleep. The waitress had seen it. In 30 seconds, she'd identified what Nathaniel had missed for 2 years. He pulled out his phone and opened the browser, typing with 2 fingers the way men his age did, hunting and pecking. Sensory processing disorder. The search results flooded his screen. Articles from medical journals, parent support groups, descriptions that made his stomach clench with recognition. Children with SPD experience ordinary stimuli as overwhelming or painful. Bright lights may feel like physical assault. Normal clothing textures can feel like sandpaper or fire. They're not misbehaving. Their nervous systems are under attack. Nathaniel looked at his grandson, really looked for the first time since Jonathan and Marianne had died in the car accident 2 years ago. The accident that had made Nathaniel a guardian again at 63 thrust back into a parenting role he'd already failed once. The waitress had known. In 30 seconds she'd known. He pressed the intercom button. "Marcus, the woman who was escorted out. Find her. Bring her to me." Marcus's voice crackled through the speaker, carefully neutral. "Sir, Miss Sinclair won't—" "Find her. Now." The Escalade pulled away from the curb, turning into the maze of downtown streets, while Nathaniel sat in the back, his hand resting on his grandson's sleeping head, wondering if he'd just made the first good decision in 2 years or the worst mistake of his life. Laura was still sitting against the wall when the headlights found her. The Escalade pulled into the alley, its bulk filling the narrow space between buildings. The passenger door opened, and a man stepped out. Not the billionaire, but an older black man in a driver's uniform holding an umbrella that looked absurdly formal in the dirty alley. "Miss Ashford, Mr. Carver would like to speak with you." Laura didn't move. "Tell Mr. Carver I appreciate the gesture, but I'm fine." "You're sitting in the rain, ma'am. You don't look fine." "I've had worse nights." Marcus, she'd heard Vivian call him that in the restaurant, crouched down, his knees cracking with the effort. He held the umbrella over both of them, studying her face with eyes that had seen too much to be fooled by brave fronts. "He's a good man, Miss Ashford. Stubborn, sometimes blind, but good. And that boy in there, he needs help. Help Mr. Carver doesn't know how to give." "I'm a waitress. I'm not a therapist." "You're someone who saw a child in pain and didn't look away. That's rarer than you think." Laura met his gaze, trying to read the angles. "What does he want?" "To talk. That's all. 5 minutes of your time." The rain drummed on the umbrella. Laura's uniform was soaked through her hair, plastered to her skull, and somewhere in her pocket her phone held messages from a hospital she couldn't afford and a landlord who'd already started eviction proceedings. What did she have to lose? She stood her joints protesting and followed Marcus to the Escalade. He opened the rear door and she slid inside, immediately conscious of how she looked, dripping, bedraggled, probably smelling of kitchen grease and rain. Nathaniel Carver sat on the opposite side, Jasper sleeping between them. He didn't offer his hand, didn't smile, just studied her with those steel-gray eyes that seemed to catalog everything without judgment. "Miss Ashford, I'm Nathaniel Carver. That's my grandson, Jasper." "I know who you are, sir." "Do you know what you did back there?" Laura glanced at the sleeping child. "I helped a scared kid, that's all." "That's all." Nathaniel's laugh was short, bitter. "I've taken Jasper to specialists in Houston, Dallas, even flew to Johns Hopkins last year. Pediatric psychiatrists, behavioral therapists, neurologists. They all said he was oppositional, disturbed. One suggested institutionalization. But you saw in 30 seconds what they missed in 2 years. He leaned forward slightly. "How?" Laura touched the locket at her throat, the gesture unconscious. "My daughter, Briar. She had SPD. I learned to recognize the signs." "You said she passed away." 6 months ago. She was 4. The admission hung between them, raw and aching. Nathaniel's expression shifted, not pity, but recognition, the look of someone who'd walked the same dark roads. "My son died 2 years ago. Car accident. His wife, too. Jasper's parents." "I'm sorry." "So am I." They sat in silence while the rain hammered the roof. Jasper stirred, making small, distressed sounds in his sleep, and both adults tensed, ready to respond. Nathaniel pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. "I need help, Miss Ashford. Not a nanny, not a babysitter. Someone who sees Jasper the way you saw him tonight. Someone who understands what he's going through." He opened the envelope, revealing a check. Laura's eyes caught the number and her breath stopped. $20,000. Signing bonus. $8,000 a month salary. Live-in position at my ranch outside the city. Your only responsibility is Jasper. Keep him safe. Keep him calm. Teach me how to be the guardian he needs. Laura stared at the check, her mind racing through calculations. $20,000 would pay for her mother's surgery. $8,000 a month would clear her debts in 3 months, 4 at most. She could breathe again, but nothing came without strings. Mr. Carver, you don't know me. You don't know if I'm qualified, if I'm trustworthy, if... I know you didn't hesitate when everyone else looked away. I know you knelt on a restaurant floor to help a child who wasn't yours. I know you lost a daughter and still had the strength to save my grandson from a breakdown. He held out the check. That's more qualification than any degree could provide. Laura's hand trembled as she reached for the paper. Her fingers touched it, and reality crashed over her. The weight of desperation, the gamble of accepting help from a stranger, the danger of hoping when hope had proven treacherous before. There's a woman, Vivian, your fiancée. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. Vivian is complicated. She and my late wife were friends. She's been helping me navigate grief and guardianship, but she struggles with Jasper, finds him difficult. The careful phrasing told Laura everything the words didn't. If I take this position, I need one condition. Name it. I don't answer to her. If she tries to override my decisions about Jasper's care, I walk. No questions asked. Something flickered in Nathaniel's eyes, surprise, maybe respect. Agreed. Laura took the check, folding it carefully, tucking it into her pocket like a promise that might still break. When do I start? Tonight. Marcus will take you home to pack. You'll move into the ranch tomorrow. The Escalade pulled out of the alley, leaving the rain and the dumpsters and Laura's old life behind. She watched the city lights blur through the window, her reflection ghosting over the glass auburn hair, exhausted eyes, the face of a woman who'd just stepped off a cliff, hoping there was ground somewhere below. On the dashboard, a photograph caught her eye. A woman with auburn hair and gray-green eyes, laughing at something outside the frame. The resemblance was striking enough to make Laura's breath catch. That's Elaine, my late wife. Nathaniel's voice carried something Laura couldn't name, longing grief, and underneath it all a question he seemed afraid to ask. You have her eyes. The words settled over them like a blanket, warm and suffocating. Laura looked away, first her pulse hammering in her throat. Marcus caught her gaze in the rearview mirror, his expression unreadable but not unkind. His lips moved, forming words too quiet for Nathaniel to hear. Be careful. The Escalade turned onto the highway headlights, cutting through the October rain, carrying Laura toward a future she couldn't predict, and a past she was about to uncover because Vivian Blackwell had killed 3 people already, and the woman who looked like Elaine Carver had just become the most dangerous threat to carefully laid plans. Behind them, Le Lumiere's lights glowed warm against the storm. Inside, Jean-Baptiste was already interviewing Laura's replacement. The restaurant would forget her by morning. But in the back of a billionaire's car, holding a check that might save her mother's life or cost her own Lorelei Ashford, had just become the most important piece on a board she didn't know she was playing on. And Vivian, watching from the window of her downtown penthouse as the Escalade passed below, smiled slowly and reached for her phone. It was time to move the timeline up. The gates to Carver Ranch opened like jaws. Iron scrollwork parting to reveal a limestone driveway that curved through live oaks older than Texas statehood. Laura pressed her forehead against the Escalade's window, watching the main house emerge from the darkness. Not the glass and steel monument to wealth she'd expected, but something older, more rooted. Hill country limestone and weathered cedar sprawling low across 12,000 acres of land that had seen Comanche raids and cattle drives and the slow transformation of wilderness into legacy. The porch wrapped around 3 sides deep enough to escape summer heat. Rocking chairs sat empty in the lamplight. Somewhere beyond the main house, Laura glimpsed stables, a barn, the dark shapes of outbuildings that spoke of working ranch rather than gentleman's hobby. Marcus pulled the Escalade to a stop beneath a porte cochere. The engine's rumble ceased, leaving only cricket song and the distant lowing of cattle. Jasper stirred in his car seat, eyelids fluttering but not opening. Whatever Vivian had given him held him under like a stone in deep water. Nathaniel opened his door first. "Welcome to Carver Ranch, Miss Ashford. Established 1923 by my grandfather with money he'd made in oil and land he'd won in a poker game. The house has seen 3 generations of Carvers, now it's just me and Jasper." The loneliness in his voice could have filled the 12,000 acres. Lore stepped out into air that smelled of cedar and distant rain. Her wet uniform clung uncomfortably, and she felt the weight of displacement, the particular vertigo of moving from one world to another in the span of an hour. The front door opened before they reached it. Vivian Blackwell stood backlit in the entrance emerald dress exchanged for a silk robe that probably cost more than Lore's car. Her platinum hair fell loose around her shoulders, and her smile held all the warmth of January sleet. "So, Nate hired you. How wonderfully charitable." She descended the porch steps with the fluid grace of someone performing for an invisible audience, circling Lore like a predator assessing prey. Up close, Vivian's perfume hit like a wall Chanel number 5, the same scent that had triggered Jasper's breakdown. Lore's sinuses burned. "Let me be clear, Miss Ashford. Jasper is broken. His parents spoiled him rotten before they conveniently died, and now we're left picking up the pieces. When Nate and I marry next month—" She touched Nathaniel's arm with proprietary confidence. "The boy will be placed in professional care, a facility in Montana that specializes in behavioral disorders. Until then, keep him sedated and quiet. Nate doesn't need the stress." Lore met Vivian's gaze without flinching. "I don't sedate children, Miss Blackwell. I help them." Vivian's smile froze, becoming something sharp and dangerous. "How noble. But you'll find that idealism doesn't survive long in the real world, sweetie. Jasper requires management, not coddling. I've already arranged his medication regimen with Dr. Eris." She pulled an amber prescription bottle from her robe pocket, shaking it so the pills rattled. "Focus, calm. 2 before bed, 3 if he has episodes. It's all properly prescribed." Lore accepted the bottle, reading the label in the porch light. No pharmacy stamp, no DEA number, just a handwritten label. "Focus, calm. Dr. Eris. As needed for behavioral management." Every instinct from her abbreviated nursing training screamed warning. "I'd like to speak with Dr. Eris about the dosage." Vivian's laugh tinkled like breaking glass. "Dr. Eris is very expensive and very busy. He doesn't take calls from the help. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a headache from tonight's disaster." She turned to Nathaniel, rising on tiptoes to kiss his cheek. Her lips lingered, staking claim. "Don't stay up too late, darling. You have the board meeting at 8. Remember, sign the guardianship papers this week so we can finalize the trust transfer. Once I'm Jasper's legal guardian, we can move forward with Montana." She disappeared inside, leaving the scent of expensive perfume and implicit threats. Nathaniel's shoulders sagged like a man carrying weight he couldn't put down. "She means well. Grief manifests differently in everyone. She's trying to protect me from watching Jasper suffer." The words sounded rehearsed, a script he'd repeated until he almost believed it. Marcus cleared his throat from the Escalade. "I'll get Jasper to his room, sir." He lifted the sleeping child with surprising gentleness, cradling him against his shoulder. Jasper's head lolled, his breathing slow and heavy. Lore followed them inside. The interior of Carver Ranch told 2 stories. The main living areas, expansive rooms with cathedral ceilings and saltillo tiles, spoke of wealth accumulated over generations. Photographs lined the walls, Nathaniel in marine dress blues, younger and harder. A wedding portrait showing him with a woman whose auburn hair and gray-green eyes made Lore's breath catch. Family gatherings, children growing, the visual timeline of a life that had been full before it emptied. But it was the West Wing hallway that made Lore's chest tighten. The walls here glowed acid yellow, the kind of aggressive brightness that made her squint even in lamplight. Fluorescent tubes ran the length of the ceiling, buzzing with that particular frequency that set teeth on edge. The air smelled chemical, like fresh paint layered over something older and sadder. Marcus stopped at the 3rd door, pushing it open. Jasper's room was a crime scene dressed as a nursery. yellow walls brighter than the hallway if such a thing were possible. Overhead fluorescence that could have lit a surgical theater. A flat-screen television mounted at child eye-level screen dark, but LED standby light blinking red in the corner. The carpet was industrial-grade Berber, the kind with texture rough enough to irritate sensitive skin. Every surface held sharp angles, the bed frame, the dresser, the toy chest with its metal latches. Marcus laid Jasper on the bed, a twin mattress covered in sheets that crinkled with starch. The boy didn't wake, lost somewhere deep. Lore stepped into the room, her trained eye cataloging violations like an inspector finding code failures. The windows were massive floor-to-ceiling glass that would flood the space with Texas sun come morning. No blackout curtains, no dimmer switches, no soft surfaces to absorb sound. She touched the wall, feeling texture rough as sandpaper under paint. How long has his room been like this? Marcus's expression went carefully neutral, the look of a man who'd learned when to speak and when silence served better. Miss Sinclair redecorated 6 months ago, said yellow was a happy color, said the boy needed more stimulation to snap out of his moods. 6 months ago, right around the time Breyer had died in Austin General, attended by a consulting pediatrician named Dr. V. Blackwell. Lore's hands curled into fists. This room is torture for a child with SPD. Every single element is designed to overwhelm. I don't think Miss Sinclair understands. She understands perfectly. The words came out harder than Lore intended. Marcus studied her face, reading something there that made his own expression shift toward alliance. The previous nanny lasted 3 weeks. The one before that 2 days. They all said Jasper was impossible. But I've driven for the Carver family 30 years, Miss Ashford. I knew that boy's father from birth. Jonathan was gentle, creative. Nothing like Nate's hard edges. And Mary Ann, she was a teacher, patient as spring. That child comes from good people. What he's become, that's not nature, that's circumstance. He moved toward the door, pausing at the threshold. Miss Sinclair keeps the focus calm locked in her bathroom. Says it's for safety, but she controls every dose. And she's always here when Nate's away on business, always in this room, always alone with the boy. The implication hung heavy as smoke. Marcus, where was Jasper the day his parents died? Here. The accident happened on Highway 290 20 miles out, brake failure, police said, but Jonathan was meticulous about car maintenance, had the Volvo serviced every 3,000 miles like clockwork. Who benefited from their deaths? Marcus's silence was answer enough. He left his footsteps fading down the yellow hallway. Lore stood alone in the terrible brightness, watching Jasper sleep the drugged sleep of the defenseless. She unscrewed the light bulbs in the overhead fixture one by one, plunging the room into darkness, illuminated only by ambient light from the hallway. The change was immediate. The air felt breathable again, the oppressive weight lifting. Tomorrow she'd start fixing this room. Tonight she'd keep watch. Lore settled into the wooden chair beside Jasper's bed, pulling out her phone. The cracked screen glowed as she opened her browser, typing with deliberate care. Scopolamine poisoning symptoms, children. The results made her stomach drop. Scopolamine hyoscine, anticholinergic drug causing confusion, hallucinations, agitation, dilated pupils. In children, extreme sensitivity. Symptoms include visual/auditory hallucinations, bugs crawling, walls melting, tachycardia, hyperthermia, violent agitation. Long-term exposure causes permanent neurological damage, known as devil's breath in criminal contexts, used to make victims compliant and amnesiac. Lore's hands shook as she pulled the amber bottle from her pocket, unscrewing the cap. The pills inside were small, white, unmarked. She lifted one to her nose. Chemical. Bitter. Nothing herbal about it. She took a photo of the pill, the bottle, the label. Then she sealed everything in a Ziploc bag she found in Jasper's bathroom, the kind of evidence preservation she'd learned in nursing school before Breyer's medical bills had forced her to drop out. Her phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. Your mother's surgery is scheduled for 7 a.m. tomorrow. Payment received. She's going to be okay. Patricia Chen, R.N. Lore closed her eyes, breathing through the wave of relief that threatened to unmake her. $20,000. Her mother would live. The price was living in this house, protecting this child, and navigating the minefield of a woman who'd redecorated a little boy's room into a torture chamber. She opened her eyes to find Jasper watching her. His pupils were still dilated from whatever Vivian had given him, but awareness flickered behind the chemical haze. His voice came out scratchy small. "Are you the new mean lady?" Lore shifted from the chair to the floor, making herself lower, less threatening. "No, sweetheart. I'm Lore. I'm here to help." "The other ladies said that. Then they gave me the bad pills that make everything scary." He sat up slowly, his miniature suit rumpled and uncomfortable. His fingers went immediately to the collar, trying to loosen it. "Can I take this off? It hurts." "Of course you can." Lore helped him out of the jacket, the shirt the terrible starched collar that had rubbed his neck raw. Underneath his skin showed welts and scratches, some fresh, some healing badly. "Jasper, the pills Vivian gives you, the ones from the amber bottle, how do they make you feel?" His face crumpled, tears welling. "Bad. The walls breathe. Bugs crawl on my arms, but no one else sees them. And I can't remember things. Like yesterday I was playing and then I was in bed, but I don't know how I got there." Anterograde amnesia, classic scopolamine effect. "Do you take them every day?" "Before Grandpa comes home. Vivian says they make me good so he won't send me away. But I don't feel good. I feel scared all the time." Lore pulled him into a hug, this small boy who'd been systematically poisoned for 6 months, maybe longer. He stiffened initially, then melted his small body, shaking with sobs he'd probably been holding back for months. "You're never taking those pills again. I promise. Vivian will be mad. Let her be mad. I'm not scared of her." The lie tasted bitter, but necessary. 3 weeks passed like a war fought in inches. Lore worked with the focused intensity of someone who understood that every victory might be temporary. She started with Jasper's room painting over the yellow with ocean blue she bought with her first paycheck. She replaced the fluorescent tubes with soft LED bulbs on dimmer switches. She installed blackout curtains, weighted blankets, a white noise machine that played actual rain, not digital loops. The transformation took 5 days of work, while Nathaniel was in Houston finalizing a merger, and Vivian was occupied with wedding preparations in town. Marcus ran interference, alerting Lore when Vivian's Mercedes turned onto the ranch road so she could hide evidence of changes. But the room was just the beginning. The pills were the real battlefield. Vivian noticed their absence on day 3. Lore had been ready, armed with printed research and calm defiance. They'd faced off in the ranch's expansive kitchen, granite countertops, and restaurant-grade appliances bearing witness to their Cold War. "Where are the Focus Calm pills, Miss Ashford?" Vivian's voice carried the particular ice of someone unaccustomed to defiance. "Locked in my room. Jasper won't be taking them anymore." "Excuse me. The pills aren't prescribed by a licensed physician. They have no pharmacy stamp, no DEA number, no proper labeling. Giving them to a child is illegal. I won't be party to it." Vivian's face flushed pink beneath her makeup. "Dr. Aris is a board-certified psychiatrist. Then he can prescribe through a legitimate pharmacy with proper documentation. Until then, no pills." "You self-righteous little—" Vivian stepped closer, invading space using height and presence as weapons. "You work for this family. That means you follow my instructions. I am going to be Nate's wife, which makes me your employer. Give me those pills or I'll have you fired before sunset." Lore held her ground, though her pulse hammered. "Mr. Carver hired me. My contract says I answer to him regarding Jasper's care. If you want to fire me, take it up with him." They'd stood there locked in silent combat until Vivian had smiled the kind of smile that promised retribution on a timeline of her choosing. "You won't last a month, sweetheart. They never do." But Lore had lasted. And in those 3 weeks, Jasper transformed. The withdrawal was brutal. The first 72 hours he shook, sweated through his sheets, woke screaming from nightmares where the walls really did melt, and insects burrowed under his skin. Lore never left his side, reading to him in low, steady tones, applying cool compresses when fever spiked, holding his hand through the worst of it. On day 4, the fog lifted. Jasper woke clear-eyed for the first time in half a year, looking around his blue room with something approaching wonder. The walls stopped moving. They were never moving, honey. The medicine made you see things that weren't there. Why would Vivian give me bad medicine? Lore had no answer that wouldn't poison a 5-year-old's understanding of human nature, so she'd deflected. Some grown-ups make mistakes. What matters is you're safe now. By week 2, Jasper laughed. The sound was rusty, unpracticed, but genuine, erupting during a failed attempt to make chocolate chip cookies that had somehow become chocolate chip pancakes. He'd gotten flour in his hair, on his face, covering the kitchen in white powder, and instead of a meltdown, he'd giggled. Nathaniel had arrived home early that day, walking into chaos, and stopped dead in the kitchen doorway. His grandson was laughing. His expression had gone through shock, disbelief, and something that looked dangerously close to hope before his natural reserve reasserted itself. But Laura had seen the tears gathering in his eyes before he'd turned away. That night they'd eaten dinner together for the first time, Nathaniel, Lore, and Jasper. Not in the formal dining room with its oppressive chandelier and mahogany table, but in the kitchen, sitting on stools at the island, eating chocolate chip pancakes at 7 p.m. because sometimes breakfast for dinner was exactly what grief needed. Jasper had fallen asleep at the table, his head pillowed on his arms, a smile still ghosting his lips. Nathaniel had carried him to bed, moving with the careful tenderness of someone handling something precious and breakable. When he'd returned, he'd found Lore washing dishes at the sink. "Miss Ashford. Lore, what you've done for him." His voice had cracked. "I don't know how to thank you. These past 2 years I thought I'd lost him completely. Lost Jonathan, lost Marianne, and lost Jasper to whatever darkness had swallowed him. But you brought him back." Lore had dried her hands, turning to face this man who'd become more than an employer without either of them acknowledging it. "He was never lost, Mr. Carver. Just buried under circumstances he couldn't control. Children aren't resilient because they bounce back. They're resilient because they keep trying even when everything hurts." Nathaniel had studied her face with that intensity she'd come to recognize the look of a man seeing ghosts in the living. "You sound like Elaine. She used to say wisdom isn't knowing the answers, it's asking better questions." The comparison had felt like touching a live wire. Lore had stepped back, putting the island between them. "I should check on Jasper before bed." But Nathaniel had stopped her with a hand on her arm, gentle, tentative. "Stay, please, just for a moment. I want to understand what you did, how you knew." So she'd told him. About Briar. About the diagnosis that came too late, the treatments they couldn't afford, the final hospitalization, where a consulting pediatrician named Dr. V. Blackwell had told Lore there was nothing more they could do. About the particular hell of watching your child slip away while the medical system shrugged and moved on. Nathaniel had listened without interrupting, his face aging 10 years in the telling. When she'd finished, he'd spoken quietly. "The doctor who told you nothing could be done. Do you remember what she looked like?" "She wore a surgical mask. I never saw her face clearly. The trauma, everything blurred together." "But you remember the name? Dr. V. Blackwell?" "Yes." Nathaniel had pulled out his phone, opening a photo album, scrolling until he found what he sought. He'd turned the screen toward Lore. The image showed Vivian at some charity gala, resplendent in designer finery, standing beside Nathaniel. But across the bottom ran a caption, "Carver Industries Annual Fundraiser." Pictured Nathaniel Carver with Dr. Vivian Blackwell Sinclair, pediatric consultant and philanthropist. The kitchen had seemed to tilt. "She's a doctor." Was. She let her license lapse 5 years ago, said private practice was too demanding. But she still consults occasionally under her maiden name. Keeps her hand in, she says. Lore had gripped the counter edge, her knuckles white. "Mr. Carver, Nate, when did your wife die?" 3 years ago. Sudden aneurysm. She'd been complaining of headaches for months, seeing things that weren't there, forgetting conversations. The doctor said she was developing early onset dementia. Then one morning she just collapsed. And Vivian was Elaine's best friend from Princeton. She'd been bringing Elaine herbal tea every day, trying to help with the headaches. After Elaine died, Vivian stayed, helped me through the grief, became indispensable. We got engaged 6 months later. The pieces had clicked together with the finality of a cell door closing. The tea. Did Elaine ever say it tasted strange? Nathaniel's brow had furrowed. She said it tasted metallic, but Vivian insisted it was medicinal herbs, that the bitterness meant it was working. Laure had pulled up her phone browser, hands shaking, typing scopolamine metallic taste into the search bar. The results confirmed what her gut already knew. Scopolamine alkaloid has distinct metallic bitter taste, often masked in beverages. Historical use includes murder via poisoned drinks. She'd turned the phone toward Nathaniel. He'd read in silence, his face draining of color, becoming something carved from stone. When he finally looked up, his eyes held a terrible understanding. "You're saying Vivian poisoned my wife." "I'm saying the symptoms match. Headaches, hallucinations, confusion, sudden catastrophic failure. And now she's giving Jasper pills that cause identical symptoms. Pills from a doctor that doesn't exist in any database I can find." Nathaniel had sat down heavily, aging another decade. Why, if she wanted me, why not just... Because Elaine had something Vivian wanted. You, your family legacy. But Elaine was beloved, competent, impossible to displace through normal means. So Vivian made her seem incompetent, unstable, until her death looked like tragic inevitability instead of murder. And Jasper is in the way, a reminder of Elaine, an obstacle to controlling your empire through the trust fund. If he's institutionalized as incompetent, Vivian becomes guardian of a $240 million inheritance. The silence that followed felt like drowning. That conversation had been 1 week ago. Since then, the house had become a chessboard where every move carried consequence. Nathaniel had demanded to see the Focus Calm pills. Laure had surrendered them along with her documentation photos. Researched Jasper's testimony recorded on her phone with his halting descriptions of bugs that crawled and walls that breathed. Nathaniel had locked himself in his study for 6 hours. When he'd emerged, his face had held the expression of a man who'd stared into an abyss and found his own failures staring back. He'd confronted Vivian that night. Laure had heard raised voices from the study, muffled through oak doors, but unmistakable. Vivian's protestations of innocence. Nathaniel's demands for Dr. Eris's contact information. The crash of something expensive hitting a wall. Vivian had emerged triumphant. "Nate's just tired, stressed about the merger. He'll calm down once we're married and the trust transfer is finalized. This is why he needs me to handle the difficult decisions." But her eyes had found Laure across the living room, and the promise there was clear as broken glass. "You're next." The attack came 2 days later. The Sterling Foundation's annual pre-gala party filled Carver Ranch with the kind of people Laure had served at La Lumiere but never imagined living among. State senators and oil executives, old money and new tech, women in gowns that cost more than cars, and men in suits tailored precisely enough to weaponize wealth. Vivian had insisted Jasper make an appearance just to say goodnight to the guests, show he's part of the family. And Nathaniel had reluctantly agreed, too exhausted from fighting to resist every battle. Laure had dressed Jasper carefully. Soft cotton pants with an elastic waistband, a button-down shirt and breathable fabric tags, already removed collar loose enough to prevent panic. She'd prepped him with the strategy they'd developed over 3 weeks. "Just wave, say goodnight everyone, then we go read Harry Potter in your room, 15 minutes maximum." Jasper had nodded, nervous but trusting. They'd walked together to the edge of the grand salon, where 100 guests mingled beneath the Texas-sized chandelier. Laure had squeezed his hand once, then released him to walk forward alone. Nathaniel had met him halfway, pride and apprehension warring on his face. "Ladies and gentlemen, my grandson Jasper." Polite applause, cooing from the senator's wife. Jasper had stood straight, finding Laure's eyes across the room for courage. "Good night, everyone." His voice had been clear, sweet, perfect. That's when Vivian had moved. She'd been standing near the bar, resplendent in silver sequins that caught light like scales. As she'd glided past Jasper, her hand had brushed his neck, casual, brief, the kind of affectionate gesture that looked innocent to observers. But Lore had seen it. Seen the massive Cartier bracelet on Vivian's wrist, diamonds set in platinum with edges sharp enough to draw blood. Seen those edges catch the delicate skin behind Jasper's ear, dragging across nerve endings already hypersensitive from weeks of chemical assault. Simultaneously, Vivian's champagne flute had slipped from her other hand. The crystal had exploded against marble tile with a sound like a gunshot. Champagne and shattered glass erupted across the floor, the noise deafening in the confined space. Jasper hadn't stood a chance. The combination of sudden pain and explosive sound had triggered every defense mechanism his traumatized nervous system possessed. The scream that erupted from him carried frequencies that made glassware vibrate. He'd thrown himself onto the floor, his body convulsing with sobs, limbs flailing as he tried to escape stimulus that had already happened. His foot had connected with an antique pedestal table. The Ming vase perched there, 1,700 years old, worth more than Lore's mother's house, had toppled, shattering into 1,000 irreplaceable pieces beside the champagne flute. The guests had recoiled like Jasper was radioactive. Vivian had clutched her wrist, face contorted in theatrical pain. "He attacked me. Nate, do something, he's dangerous." Nathaniel had stood paralyzed, caught between instinct and the weight of 100 pairs of eyes judging his family, his grandson, his failure. Lore had moved. She'd sprinted across the salon floor in the soft flats she'd worn specifically for this possibility, dodging flailing limbs, creating a barrier with her body between Jasper and the broken glass, spreading like blood across marble. She'd pulled the textured sensory ball from her pocket, always carried now, always ready, and pressed it into his hand. "Jasper, eyes on me. Squeeze the anger into the ball. All of it. Give it to me." Her voice had cut through his panic the way it always did, a frequency calibrated specifically to reach him when the world became overwhelming. His fingers had closed around the ball, squeezing hard enough to whiten knuckles, and the screaming had shifted to ragged breathing. 5 minutes that felt like hours, with the state's wealthiest citizens watching a waitress-turned-nanny perform triage on a marble floor among the wreckage of priceless antiquities. When Jasper had finally curled into her arms, shaking but quiet, Vivian had delivered her verdict with perfect timing. "I told you, Nate. The new nanny's methods clearly aren't working. He needs professional, institutional help before he hurts someone." She dabbed at dry eyes with a handkerchief, playing the victim with practiced precision. Nathaniel had looked down at Lore, cradling his grandson amid broken porcelain and scattered flowers, and his face had held something Lore had never seen there before. Doubt. The fallout from the gala spread like poison through Carver Ranch's limestone walls. Nathaniel retreated into his study, emerging only for business calls conducted in clipped, exhausted tones. The warmth that had begun building between them, those kitchen dinners, those moments when he'd looked at Lore like she'd performed miracles, evaporated like Texas dew under August sun. He didn't fire her immediately. Jasper's attachment made that impossible, the boy's fingers reaching for Lore's hand whenever footsteps approached. But Nathaniel hired Mrs. Eleanor Higgins. 3 days after the gala, a British woman with steel-gray hair and the particular disapproval of someone who'd spent 40 years in service to families whose wealth excused their cruelty. Surveillance became Lore's shadow. Those pale eyes tracked every movement, recording infractions in cramped handwriting. Vivian produced new pills, vitamins with proper pharmacy labels, this time prescribed by Dr. Harrison Chen from San Antonio. When Lore refused to administer them, Mrs. Higgins noted the defiance with relish. The wedding preparations accelerated. White roses and silk draping transformed the ranch into something from magazines. 12 days until November 15th. 12 days until Vivian became Jasper's legal guardian through marriage. Nathaniel signed the guardianship transfer papers 1 week before the wedding. Lore found him afterward, bourbon in hand, staring at documents that gave Vivian control over Jasper's $240 million trust fund. "It's the right thing. Vivian has connections to the best facilities. Jasper needs professional care we can't provide." His voice carried hollow conviction. "Mr. Carver, please listen." "I've listened, Lore. I've heard your theories. But the doctors Vivian brought in agree institutional care might be best. What do you want from me?" You want me to believe my fiancé is a murderer based on pills. A pharmacist guessed might be suspicious. A child's nightmares. Your grief-fueled conviction. The words landed like physical blows. Lore showed him Wade's timeline. Vivian's dead husbands, the inheritance patterns, the symptoms matching Elaine's final months. Nathaniel had studied the evidence, then looked up with defeated eyes. I see coincidence. Tragic coincidence you're twisting into conspiracy because the alternative is too ordinary to bear. You're fired, Lore. Effective immediately. Be gone by morning or I'm calling the police. Wade Ashford had been waiting at a truck stop off I-35 when Lore arrived at 2 a.m., carrying everything she owned in 2 suitcases. Her brother stood beside his dusty F-250, 55 years of Texas sun and hard truths etched into his weathered face. They hadn't spoken since Breyer's funeral 3 years ago, when grief had shattered what remained of their relationship. Saw you on the news. Carver Foundation gala coverage. Recognized you in the background. He'd pulled a manila folder from his truck, spreading contents across the tailgate. I've been tracking Vivian Blackwell for 5 years. Former Ranger doesn't mean I stopped caring about justice. The first document showed Richard Blackwell died March 2017 heart attack. Estate value $28 million. Widow Vivian Blackwell. Husband number 1, 8 months married when his heart gave out. Second document. Gregory Stone died November 2020 stroke. Estate value $35 million. Widow Vivian Stone Blackwell. Husband number 2, 14 months married. Another sudden death. Wade had looked up granite-faced. Both showed identical symptoms before death. Headaches, hallucinations, visual disturbances. Their doctors diagnosed stress, never poisoning. By the time I had evidence to reopen investigations, statute of limitations had run on exhumation orders. He'd spread photographs across the metal. She's a black widow. Marries wealth, makes the husband seem incompetent, inherits when they conveniently die. She's done it twice. Elaine Carver was victim number 3. Lore had pulled out her phone, showing her own evidence. The Focus Calm pills, Jasper's testimony. The timeline matching Vivian's consulting work at Austin General when Breyer died. Wade's face had gone pale. Jesus Christ, she killed your daughter to eliminate a loose end. And now she's killing Jasper. We have 12 days before the wedding makes everything harder. Wade had gripped her shoulders. I wasn't there when Breyer was sick. When you were drowning and I was busy being the hero to strangers. I can't fix that. But I can help you save this one. The plan required precision and timing that left no margin for error. Wade's toxicologist contact, Dr. Silas Brennan from UT Austin, agreed to expedited analysis of the vitamin pills. 72 hours for full results through gas chromatography mass spectrometry. Detective Carmen Rodriguez, Wade's former partner in Austin PD, reviewed evidence on Vivian's previous husbands, looking for patterns justifying reopened investigations. But evidence took time. Time they didn't have. We need a confession. Lore's voice had cut through the truck stop's engine noise. Even with exhumation orders, Vivian's lawyers will drag this through courts for years. Jasper doesn't have years. He has 12 days. So we make her confess. How? Give her what she wants. Make her feel safe enough to gloat. Wade had studied his sister's face, seeing the plan forming. You're going back. I'll position myself as broken, defeated. She'll believe it because it confirms what she already thinks, that I'm unstable, projecting dead daughter trauma not worth her concern. And when she drops her guard, I get her talking, get her to admit everything on record. That's dangerous. What's the alternative? We wait while Jasper gets drugged into compliance. Wade had been quiet, then nodded. Okay, but we wire you properly. I'll be outside with Rodriguez. Any sign things go wrong, we breach immediately. Doctor. Brennan's report arrived on November 13th. The vitamins contained scopolamine hydrochloride, amphetamine salts, and zolpidem. The combination caused hallucinations, memory loss, and in high doses respiratory depression. Long-term exposure would kill slowly enough to look like natural deterioration. Detective Rodriguez filed for exhumation orders on Vivian's previous husbands. The evidence justified reopening investigations, but legal processes took weeks. The wedding was 2 days away. On November 14th, Laura's mother called from the recovery center. The doctors say I'm cancer-free, complete remission. Helen Ashford's voice carried strength Laura hadn't heard in months. Your brother told me about the Carver situation, about the little boy who needs protecting. When Briar was sick, I watched you fight every battle you could. You have your father's stubbornness and my refusal to let injustice stand. Mom, I don't know if I'm strong enough. Strength isn't about never being afraid. It's about moving forward even when terror threatens to unmake you. You've survived losing a child. Everything after that is just details. The words settled over Laura like armor. November 15th dawned clear and cold. Carver Ranch had transformed into a fairy tale cathedral, silk bunting and temporary structures capable of holding 200 guests. The ceremony was scheduled for 4 p.m. Laura arrived at noon driving through gates that opened to Marcus's security override. She parked near the service entrance and sat gathering courage. Wade's voice crackled through her phone's earbud. We're in position. Rodriguez has a warrant team 2 miles out. Say the word and we come running. Understood. She'd walked toward the house, finding Mrs. Higgins in the kitchen. Miss Ashford, you were terminated. I need to speak with Miss Blackwell. To apologize. Mrs. Higgins' expression had softened slightly. Bridal suite. 2nd floor east wing. 5 minutes before I call security. Laura climbed stairs that felt like countdown toward something irreversible. The bridal suite door stood open. Vivian sat in full preparation, hair swept into elaborate updo makeup, airbrushed perfect silk robe, while attendants fussed with the Vera Wang gown nearby. Vivian saw Laura in the mirror and went still. Well, come to sabotage the wedding. I came to apologize and to ask you something. Vivian waved attendants away. Leave us. When the door closed, she turned, studying Laura with clinical interest. You look terrible. Hollow-eyed, defeated. It's a good look on you. I need to understand, before you marry Nate, why Briar? Why did you let my daughter die? The question hung sharp as broken glass. Vivian's smile spread slowly victorious. Your daughter, the little redhead at Austin General. Dr. Blackwell remembers her case. She poured champagne, sipping while Laura's world tilted. Elaine mentioned you once, said you were a nursing student with remarkable intuition about pediatric patients. I couldn't risk you and the Carver family ever crossing paths. Couldn't risk you recognizing me putting pieces together. So you killed her. I expedited the inevitable. She was dying anyway. I just didn't fight as hard as I could have. Loose ends, Laura. I eliminate them. Laura's phone sat on the dresser, recording app running. And Elaine Jasper's mother. Vivian laughed, bright and terrible. Elaine was weak, had everything I deserved: Nate's love, the family legacy, respect. She was squandering it. I did Nate a favor. The tea was just encouragement. She made herself look mentally unstable. I simply provided the tools. Jonathan Marianne. Jonathan was about to discover financial irregularities in the foundation accounts. The break line was remarkably easy to access. Marianne was collateral damage, but she was too perceptive anyway. Vivian stepped closer, champagne in hand, confidence radiating. The beautiful part: I'm going to win. In 4 hours, I marry Nathaniel Carver. Become Jasper's guardian. In 6 months, the boy will have a tragic accident at his facility. Medication errors are so common. And I'll be the grieving stepmother consoled by a trust fund worth $240 million. Nate will know eventually. Will he? By then, we'll have been married for years. His empire will be so entangled with my management that separating us would destroy everything. Men like Nathaniel choose preservation over truth every time. She reached for Laura's phone, seeing the recording app's red light. Her expression hadn't changed. No panic, just amusement. Did you really think I'd incriminate myself on a recording you could use? Texas is two-party consent. Anything captured without my knowledge is inadmissible. Your little confession is worthless. She deleted the recording with one tap, tossing the phone back. Now get out before security removes you. Again. Laura picked up her phone, hands trembling, and walked toward the door. At the threshold, she turned back. Grace isn't something you're born with. It's something you choose when everyone else chooses to look away. Vivian frowned, confused. Laura touched her ear where the tiny earbud sat hidden. I know Texas is two-party consent. That's why Detective Carmen Rodriguez was listening through this wire. You just confessed to multiple murders to a law enforcement officer conducting an active investigation. That's perfectly admissible. Vivian's face drained of color. Laura walked out as Vivian started screaming for lawyers. Wade and Rodriguez were already moving through the house, warrant in hand, back up 30 seconds out. The wedding never happened. 6 months later. The Austin courthouse steps were crowded with media when the verdict came down. Cameras flashed as bailiffs escorted Vivian Blackwell, no longer platinum perfect hair gone gray at the roots, designer clothes replaced with county orange through the crush. The judge's voice had been clear. Vivian Blackwell, you are hereby sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms without possibility of parole for the murders of Richard Blackwell, Gregory Stone, and Dr. Elaine Carver. Additional sentences of 25 years each for the attempted murders of Jasper Carver and Helen Ashford, and 15 years for vehicular homicide in the deaths of Jonathan and Marianne Carver. The gavel had fallen with the finality of a closing door. Laura watched from the gallery, Wade beside her, as justice, slow, messy, imperfect, finally arrived. Spring came to Carver Ranch like a promise kept. The limestone house no longer felt cold. Nathaniel had removed the yellow paint, the harsh lights, the sharp edges that had made the space feel like a mausoleum. Now warmth lived in the walls. Photographs of Elaine and Jonathan and Marianne displayed with honor. Jasper's artwork covering the refrigerator, the sound of laughter echoing through rooms that had forgotten how. Helen Ashford lived in the guest house, cancer-free and stronger than she'd been in years. She spent mornings in the garden with Jasper, teaching him about plants and patience and how things grow back even after they've been cut down. The Briar and Elaine Foundation occupied the renovated West Wing. Laura ran it with the focused intensity of someone who'd turned grief into purpose. Pediatric sensory processing disorder research, support groups for families navigating diagnoses, scholarships for nursing students who couldn't afford to finish their degrees. Nathaniel had funded it entirely, telling Laura it was the least he could do for being blind when she'd seen clearly. On a Sunday in late April, they drove to the Hill Country Cemetery, where 3 graves sat beneath live oaks. Nathaniel, Laura, and Jasper stood in the dappled shade while mockingbirds sang overhead. Nathaniel knelt at Elaine's headstone, touching the engraved letters of her name. I'm sorry I didn't protect you. Sorry I didn't see what was happening until it was too late. You deserved better than my blindness. His voice cracked. Laura knelt beside him, her hand on his shoulder. She knows. And she sent me to finish what she started, keeping Jasper safe. Nathaniel looked at her. This woman who'd fought battles he hadn't believed existed, and saw not his late wife's ghost, but someone entirely her own. You saved my grandson's life. You saved my soul. How do I thank you for that? You already have. You gave me purpose when I'd lost mine. You gave me family when I thought I'd never have one again. Jasper placed wildflowers on each grave, his mother's, his father's, his grandmother's, with the careful reverence of a 6-year-old who understood loss but chose hope anyway. Miss Laura says they're watching from heaven, that they're proud of me for being brave. Nathaniel lifted his grandson, holding him close. They are, Buddy, so proud, and they're grateful you have Miss Laura to protect you when I couldn't see the danger. Jasper's 6th birthday party filled the ranch with children, kids from his new school, from the foundation's support groups, from families who'd found community and shared struggles. No formal dining rooms, no crystal chandeliers, just the backyard with balloons and a cake shaped like a monarch butterfly. Jasper stood at the picnic table, 6 candles flickering, surrounded by people who loved him, not despite his sensitivity, but because of his brave, beautiful heart. Make a wish, sweetheart. Laura stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder. Jasper closed his eyes, thinking hard, then blew out the candles in one breath. What did you wish for? Can't tell, or it won't come true. But I hope Mommy and Daddy can see me happy. Laura's throat closed. They can, Jasper. I promise they can. Nathaniel joined them, his presence steady and sure. "And they sent Lore to make sure you'd always have someone fighting for you. Someone who sees you exactly as you are and loves you because of it, not in spite of it." Jasper looked between them, this grandfather who'd learned to ask better questions, and this woman who'd refused to look away when everyone else had, and smiled the kind of smile that made the previous year's darkness worth surviving. "Is Miss Lore my family now?" Lore met Nathaniel's eyes, seeing the question there, the hope, the possibility of something neither had expected. "If you'll have me, Jasper, I'd be honored." The boy threw his arms around both of them. Cake-sticky hands, and all creating a bridge between grief and grace that no one could have predicted 6 months earlier. Marcus appeared with his camera, capturing the moment, three people who'd been broken separately learning to be whole together. That evening, after the guests had gone and Jasper slept peacefully in his blue room with weighted blankets and soft lights, Nathaniel and Lore sat on the porch watching stars emerge over 12,000 acres of Texas hill country. "I've been thinking about what you said that night. About grace being something you choose." Nathaniel's voice carried the weight of hard-won wisdom. "I spent 2 years choosing blindness because seeing the truth would have meant admitting I'd failed to protect the people I loved. Failed Elaine, failed Jonathan, failed Jasper. You were deceived by someone who'd spent years perfecting the art of deception. That doesn't absolve me. I should have listened when you first raised concerns. Should have investigated instead of dismissing you as an unstable woman projecting grief." Lore was quiet, letting him work through confession toward whatever came next. "You taught me something, Lore. Something Elaine used to say, but I'd forgotten. Wisdom isn't knowing the answers, it's asking better questions. You asked the questions I was too afraid to ask." He turned to face her. "I want you to stay, not as Jasper's caregiver, but as family. As the person who sees what I'm too close to see, who fights battles I don't know need fighting. As someone I trust completely because you've already proven you'll choose truth over comfort every single time." Lore felt tears gathering. "I'm not Elaine. I'll never be her." "I know. You're Lorelei Ashford, and that's exactly who we need." The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and indifferent, while two broken people chose to build something new from the wreckage of what had been stolen 1 year later. The dedication ceremony for the Breyer and Elaine Foundation's new pediatric wing drew a crowd of 500. Dignitaries and donors' families whose children had been helped, medical professionals who'd partnered in the research. Nathaniel stood at the podium, silver-haired and steady, looking out at faces that represented second chances and hard-won grace. "A year ago, I was a man who'd lost everything that mattered. My wife to a murderer I'd welcomed into my home. My son and daughter-in-law to that same woman's calculated violence. My grandson to systematic poisoning I was too blind to see. I'd given up, accepted defeat, convinced myself that some losses were inevitable." His voice carried across the assembled crowd. "Then a waitress with bleeding hands and a dead daughter taught me something I'd forgotten. That dignity isn't about never falling. It's about standing back up. That grace isn't given. It's chosen in moments when everyone else chooses to look away." He gestured to Lore, standing beside Jasper near the ribbon they'd soon cut. "Lorelei Ashford didn't just save my grandson's life. She reminded me that family isn't blood alone. It's the people who fight for you when you can't fight for yourself, who see the invisible pain and refuse to ignore it, who choose courage over comfort, truth over convenience, grace over revenge." Nathaniel's eyes found Jasper healthy and whole, holding Lore's hand. "This foundation exists because two remarkable women, my late wife, Dr. Elaine Carver, and Lore's late daughter, Breyer Ashford, understood that invisible suffering deserves visible advocacy. That children who experience the world differently aren't broken. They're just navigating a world not built for their needs." He stepped back from the microphone, letting Lore and Jasper cut the ribbon together while cameras flashed and applause thundered. Later, when the crowds had dispersed and only family remained, they stood together in the new wing's quiet halls. Nathaniel, Lore, Jasper, Helen Wade, and Marcus. An unlikely constellation of people bound not by blood, but by choice, by battles fought and survived, by grace extended and received. Jasper tugged Lore's hand. "Miss Lore, when I grow up I want to help kids like me. like you and Grandma Elaine did. Lore knelt, meeting his eyes. Then that's exactly what you'll do, because you've already learned the most important lesson, that surviving hard things makes you strong enough to help others survive them too. She stood Nathaniel's hand, finding hers, creating a circle of protection around a child who'd nearly been lost to calculated cruelty, but had been saved by one woman's refusal to look away. Outside, spring rain began to fall, washing the Texas limestone clean, nurturing seeds that would grow into something beautiful and strong. And in the foundation's lobby, a plaque read, "The Briar and Elaine Foundation," in memory of Briar Ashford and Dr. Elaine Carver, who taught us that grace is not inherited, it is chosen. Every day, in every moment when we choose to see the invisible. The word stood as testament to what had been lost and what had been built from the wreckage. To a waitress who'd saved a billionaire's soul. To a child who'd survived and would thrive. To a family forged not in blood, but in the fires of truth and the cool grace of forgiveness. Some stories end with revenge. This one ended with resurrection.